Hi, 8th graders. This is Ms. Meyer here to talk to you about the short story, The Revolution by Jacqueline Woodson. If you didn't watch my video about what the meanings of revolution are, I recommend you check that out, or at least familiarize yourself with the definition of revolution. I recommend using learnersdictionary.com to look up terms, learnersdictionary.com. Otherwise, just take a few moments, 5 minutes, to go check out my other video. In the meantime, I'm going to move forward. So, some questions I didn't cover in the last video. Why did the narrator decide to put the uncle that went to jail in the story? So in the beginning of the story, the uncle says, "Don't wait for your school to teach you." My uncle says about the revolution, it's happening in the streets. He's been out of jail for more than a year now, and his hair is an afro again. There's a lot going on in these few lines of the text. If you think about the idea of this story being called the revolution and the idea of a revolution meaning significant change and circular motion, you can think of it as the narrator noting that the uncle is back in her revolution and her cycle around the earth or around her life, because that comes back into play later on when we're talking about the narrator and what she expects for her life. So I see this particular line as the narrator, or Jacqueline Woodson herself, talking about how her uncle may have stepped off of that carousel for a short time, the metaphorical carousel, not the real one, stepped out of it because of being put in jail for whatever reason that there was. But he's been back onto the ride again for quite some time now. He's free. He's got his hair flowing. It's growing free in that afro, which was really reminiscent of the 70s, which is, I'm assuming, when this takes place, because that's when afros became like a big political statement. And we also know, I know, because my dad talked about it all the time, that there were a lot of protests about the revolution happening in the 60s and 70s. And so that's a way for the author to tell us about her own connection to her family members and also about her connection to the world that she was a part of at that point. And her uncle was disconnected because of being put in jail. Not that he was taken out of the world, but you're removed from the world a significant amount when you're placed in jail. And it happens to a lot of people unnecessarily, we have to acknowledge. And so he's back in the world again, and he's on that carousel ride of living life and being a part of that circular history that the author mentions later on in the text. So that's my explanation for why the narrator decided to put the uncle in there. Also, it's legit. We have uncles who get into trouble and do weird stuff. Like, I don't know about you, but that's happened to me. Jail or no jail, like, uncles get into stuff. Let's be real. Okay. I'm going to go over to this question on the far right. What do you mean by, and after I write it down, maybe I'll end it this way. So this short story actually comes from a collection of poems by Jacqueline Woodson, and it's a type of memoir about her own life, which is why her name is in this story. And so this is her talking about how she's going to become a writer someday, which she did, and she's awesome at it, and just how she came to understand the world that she's a part of. So this particular line comes at this point in the book. So there's not a whole lot left. It's over halfway through the book, and she's talking about how she's going to write these memories down, write these ideas down, and when she does, she's going to make a declaration about herself and say that she is who she is, her name, and that she's here for the ride. All right? So hopefully that offered some clarity around those particular questions. I have about 30 seconds remaining to quickly talk about the comprehension quiz. What does the uncle tell the narrator about the revolution? That it's happening in the streets. You can't just learn about stuff through books. You're going to books, digital books nowadays, but you have to learn about what's actually happening in the world around us. Who was Shirley Chisholm? She was the first Black woman to run for president, and there's context clues in the text to tell us that. Okay? The two meanings of the word revolution are pushing for a change and moving in a circle, like a carousel. What does the narrator compare a carousel to is how people are a part of history for a short time. If we think about the circle of life, we're not here for the whole time, but we're a part of it for a time, and that's awesome. I hope this was helpful.